I'm really delighted to be here, and I say that not just out of courtesy, because it's good to see some old friends. We're going to hear a wonderful panel conversation. As soon as you get rid of me, I'm the opening act for the real thing. I'm delighted to be here because for over 2 decades, I've been a friend and admirer of Charlie Bruner. And I do say admirer because Charlie, for those of you who know him, is perhaps the most dangerous person that it used to be a typewriter and with whatever he uses these days. Because you'd have a good conversation with Charlie, you'd talk about 3 or 4 ideas. Charlie would fly back to Iowa. By the time he gets back, you've got a 5 or 6 page memo to which you now feel obligated to respond. He has really been a mentor and a teacher as well as a friend. So when he asked me a few months ago to do this, I said, of course I'll do it. We'll pick the date. And many of you know that there's really some good news happening today. In fact, you will see me disappear sometime early this afternoon because we have a funders briefing which I'm hosting. And I'm hosting it via the telephone because I told Charlie I'd be here. And I didn't want to call Charlie and said, no, I can't. So we have a funders briefing. That funders briefing is about the Early Learning Challenge Fund. And the decisions are going to be announced tomorrow. Now, since they tell me that folks in Iowa are well connected, you will probably hear tonight. Because whatever the decisions will be announced tomorrow, what it means is they'll be calling the members of Congress late this afternoon and telling them, so that sometime this afternoon they will tell the funders, here's what we did with it, and they will tell us everything but who won. And then they'll call Congress and they'll tell their congressional delegation who wins. They'll swerve to secrecy until it's released tomorrow, and that secrecy oath will last about 3.5 seconds. So you will probably know before I know what happened. And it's a really wonderful opportunity, and I wish I could be there for the announcement tomorrow. But being here is important, and I'll tell you why it's important to me. Not just about Charlie Bruner, and not just the opportunity to see Shannon Cofield again, but it's really because here in Iowa, your governor, building on a tradition in this state that goes back a century, has taken a step which could put Iowa back in the lead. And I wanted to be here to say that, in a time when we see our politics paralyzed by partisanship, by a 24/7 news cycle, by the ongoing forever campaign, it is really difficult to see good policy emerge. And I know that the devil's in the details. I know there's a whole lot to discuss and debate. But the fact that your governor had the wisdom to put in writing and to commit to 3rd grade literacy as an important cornerstone of the plan to create world-class schools in this state is an important development, and I wanted to be able to say that out loud. I wanted to be able to say it out loud here in Iowa. And I will begin where I will end. There is an opportunity for Iowa to lead, and it's an opportunity to be missed. For the last 1.5 years, I've been leading what we call the campaign for grade level reading. And that campaign appeals because of the following. We start where people are. And there's a consensus around high school graduation. And by the way, Iowa is not doing too badly. I think you're number 3 but I hear that somehow you think you ought to be number one. So I'm waiting to see what happens. We start with a consensus around high school graduation. And that consensus then says, why is it only 85%? Why is it only 83%? What we know today is that high school graduation is the portal to the kind of workforce that will keep this nation competitive in the global economy. What we know is high school graduation is a condition needed for entry to college, because it's the post-secondary work that will really push the nation ahead. We know that the high school class produces our military. In fact, if you listen to the retired military officers who are in mission readiness, they have joined their voices to those of us who argue for attention to the early years and the early grades and education generally, expressing their concern that our current high school class across the nation is not large enough, not broad enough, not deep enough, and not strong enough to meet our military needs. They are concerned that 74% of young people between 17 and 24 are not eligible to join the military, either because of health problems, criminal records, substance abuse, or failure to finish high school. And they're concerned that 30% of those who finish high school fail the Armed Forces exam. Now, with no disrespect to anybody here with a military background, the Armed Forces exam should not be the high water mark of our high school graduates. And the fact that 30% failed is a disgrace. So they have raised their voices and argued that if we care about national security and our military readiness, we've got to do more, we've got to do better. You know, across the country now we have people who, we have entrepreneurs who are given money for people to drop out of college and really go into innovation. You know, there's a thing that, you know, Bill Gates would have never been Bill Gates if he had stayed at Harvard. And there are countless examples that our most important innovators did not finish college on time. They went someplace else. And there's now an entrepreneur who is actually giving people $100,000. If you've got a really good idea, drop out of college and do that. But even those entrepreneurs are not saying leave high school. Even the NBA say finish high school. So we've got a consensus around high school. So if we're going to increase high school graduation, the question then becomes, what's the best investment? Where is the inflection point? And when we looked at the research, the inflection point was grade level reading at the end of third grade. And I know there are researchers in the room, and in fact, one of the best researchers in the world, Heather White, so I'm always nervous whenever I say this with researchers in the room. But here's the distillation of the research, especially for low-income kids. Kids who read at grade level by the end of third grade, they graduate from high school. Kids who don't read at grade level by the end of third grade don't. Now, you'll quickly say, oh, wait a minute, we're all uncomfortable with arguments that seem too deterministic, and then we got these great examples. Well, most of the great examples are your kids and my kids. If our kids don't read at grade level by the end of third grade, that kid is going to have more homework, more after-school tutoring, more summer programming, summer camp. Our kids will do graduate from high school, regardless of where their reading is at the end of third grade, because we've got the resources to make it happen. For low-income parents and parents who are trapped in poverty, they don't have those resources, and for their kids, performance at that level all too often, unfortunately, becomes destiny. So we moved to invest against third grade reading, and what we found out is that the needle hasn't moved. That 80% of low-income kids 80%, including in this state. When measured by NAEP, 80% of low-income kids miss the mark in terms of reading by 3rd grade. That is a catastrophe of enormous proportions. And I really wanted to be here today to applaud your government for taking it on and for saying that in this state, that is unacceptable. I want to recognize that as we've launched this campaign, Ames, Council Bluff, Des Moines, Dubuque, Marshalltown, Quad Cities, Waterloo, and Cedar Falls have joined. And they have joined this campaign saying in our communities we intend to change it, which means here in Iowa, by a per capita basis, you have got more commitment, more energy, more determination, and with your governor and legislature, you've got more leadership than possibly any other place in the country. But you know, when you look at the Iowa data, and I know the secretary was in here recently, the Iowa data, you know, Iowa has this distinguished history of educational leadership, and leadership in public education. But the Iowa data today are not as encouraging as they used to be. And it's not because Iowa's gotten worse, falling backward or doing everything wrong. It's because Iowa now seems to be languishing rather than leading. And I think what I'm hearing here is what we call constructive dissatisfaction. This is a UPS term. Constructive dissatisfaction with languishing and an intention to lead.